Hi everyone, this is Dr. Nitin Chhoda and welcome to my channel. In this video, I'm going to answer the question, why do they want to end the $600 per week federal boost? And I'm going to analyze an interview with Senator Rob Portman because he's the one who introduced the back to work bonus. I'm going to go over three things in this video. The first is the clash of ideologies, the differences in opinion between the Democrats and the Republicans. Now we have a Democratic controlled House and a Republican controlled Senate. So unfortunately, one side can't get anything done without the other. The second, I'm going to analyze an interview with Senator Rob Portman because he's the one who introduced the back to work bonus. And number three, I'll give you my thoughts on where all of this is headed. Now, the American Action Forum, which is a non-profit organization in Washington, D.C., stated that nationally 63% of workers currently make more on unemployment than they would if they had their regular job. Now, what's even more interesting is if that booster was reduced to as little as $100 a week, even then 25% of the US workforce would still make more money on unemployment if they just received an extra $100 per week from the federal booster as compared to if they were actually working. Now, the reason this discrepancy exists is because a disproportionately large portion of the workforce is a low wage earner and a middle income earner. In fact, this organization went one step further and said that due to variations between states, changing the amount of the federal supplement will affect the incentives for some workers more than others, which makes sense because it depends on what you were earning before you went on unemployment. But the main takeaway from the American Action Forum was that a uniform federal policy, in other words, a policy that's uniform across the country, does not make sense because of the differences between workers in income levels, because of the differences in the way states pay out unemployment. So a uniform federal policy is not the answer. Speaking of uniform federal policies, Senator Rob Portman from Ohio came up with the back to work proposal. And let's take a close look at an interview that he did recently.
This is an idea you first brought up with us, at least. I think it was about a month ago, although it's hard to tell how much time has passed over that. But your thought at that point was that people on the front lines who were going back to work should have an incentive to actually do that, to get back in. What kind of progress have you made on that front since?
Well, for the last 6 weeks, really, we've been talking about doing it now as part of the $600. But as I talked to you today, you know, the July 31st date is looming, and that's when the $600 ends. Democrats are insisting that there be $600 not just for the next month or so, but into next year. Republicans, for the most part, are insisting that the $600 end. I think there's a good way to deal with this, which is to say, let's have a lesser amount as a federal supplement to the state unemployment insurance, but then let's provide this bonus. I think we should have it right now.
Now, this is quite significant because on the one, and there were three important things that just happened here. The first is that Senator Rob Portman pointed out that the July 31st deadline is coming, which means the $600 per week federal booster is going to go away. But he also highlighted the differences between the Democratic and the Republican ideologies. He did say that the Democrats want to extend the unemployment benefits.
Democrats are insisting that there be $600 not just for the next month or so, but into next year.
And he did talk about the Republicans wanting to get individuals back to work.
Republicans, for the most part, are insisting that the $600 end. I think there's a good way to deal with this.
But there was something very interesting that he said, and hopefully you, my subscriber, picked up on it. He talked about a smaller federal booster after the 31st of July. In other words, he said that after the 31st of July, individuals could get less than $600 if they remained on unemployment. And then individuals who got back to work would get a back to work bonus. Now, there are a lot of things to consider here because quite honestly, where are the jobs? A lot of us don't have jobs to go back to. We'll actually address that later on in this interview. But the interesting thing he said here was that individuals would get a smaller federal booster, not the full $600 after the 31st of July. This is something they're working on. He said they've been working on it for the past 6 weeks. And he talked about a back to work bonus. This is the proposal that's seriously being considered.
Now that doesn't seem to be happening because it's already a disincentive to work, the $600. But it creates an additional disincentive as the economy begins to reopen even further and there's more and more demand for labor. So
this is also important. I've done other interviews, I've done other analysis on my YouTube channel. Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin, White House Economic Advisor Larry Kudlow, and now Senator Rob Portman and many other individuals in the Republican administration have used the words disincentive to work because they It is their opinion based on the data that they see that the $600 per week federal booster is creating a situation where individuals are not motivated to go back to work. So you can see this is a general consensus. So in one way, shape or form, the $600 per week federal booster is likely to go away after the 31st of July, but what's likely to replace it is a smaller federal booster for those who continue to remain unemployed, and which is a lot of us, as I'm sure you know, and also a back to work bonus, which is likely to happen. Remember, this is something that's being talked about, but it hasn't yet become a formal proposal, and it's quite a long way away from being signed into law by the president. But let's continue listening to the interview, because there are a lot of nuggets, there are a lot of essential takeaways that are coming up in this video.
Let's allow people to take some of that money back to work with them. It helps them to get back to work, back to their health care, and most people get their health care, to their retirement. If they have a 401k, they likely have retirement at work, and back to training and back to the dignity of work. And for small businesses, they're desperate to get people. I hear this across the state of Ohio. You guys hear from across the country that it's harder to get people back. It also happens to save the taxpayers a lot of money, both the state level, because fewer people on unemployment insurance at the state level, but also this federal supplement would be less than the $600. So I think it's a good idea, and I think it's encouraging work, which everybody should want to do.
And what kind of level are we talking? I think when we spoke with you last year, we're thinking $400 to go back to work, $400 a week?
Well, $450 out of the $600 is what we came up with, really as a way to make people equal to someone who's on minimum wage. In other words, there wouldn't be a disadvantage for someone coming off UI if they were at a minimum wage job. That's an average. That's how the $450 was arrived at, and it was a 6-week program. Again, I support that right now. I wish Congress would pass it. The House is not in session. I can't see it happen.
So Senator Rob Portman talks about how they came up with the $450 a week number, and he proposed that it's going to last for 6 weeks after an individual gets back to work. So again, the goal here is to get individuals, the Republican goal here is to get individuals back to work as quickly as possible. But to be honest, some of these questions are basically what I call softball questions. I believe Senator Rob Portman should have been asked the really difficult, the really challenging questions like, where are the jobs? What's going to happen to individuals who are called back to work but with a minimal number of hours? What's going to happen to individuals who've been furloughed? What's going to happen to individuals who've been permanently laid off? What happens to them? Where are the jobs? There are no jobs out there. So in a sense, this interview was again a bit of a softball interview. A lot more challenging questions should have been asked, but we have what we have, and I'm going to try and read between the lines and give you the information as I see it.
Immediately, but I do think that when we hit this July 31st date, which again is a cliff, we go from 600 to nothing. The Democrats are going to insist on 600 going again into next year, and some well into next year. And Republicans saying we shouldn't continue because it's a disincentive, which it is. And the University of Chicago American Action Forum study you talked about shows that. In fact, for the bottom 20% of wage earners, they're making twice as much on average under unemployment insurance as they would going back to work.
Now, this is something where I believe Senator Portman does not see the full story. He said the bottom 20% of wage earners, according to that AAF study that I mentioned at the start of this video, are making twice as much on unemployment. I mean, so what? It's not their fault that they are low wage earners. It's not their fault that they're doing jobs where they earn very little to begin with. And now, because of this crisis, most of them, by the way, in travel, in restaurants, in hospitality, in entertainment, have lost their jobs. It's not their fault that they lost their jobs, and therefore it shouldn't be their fault. In fact, I believe that individuals who need help the most should get the most help. So the way Senator Rob Portman talks about it is, well, there are a certain number of individuals who are making twice as much on unemployment. I do believe that the current system as it exists is not very balanced, but at the same time, individuals who need help the most should, in my opinion, get it.
So I think we need to come up with something creative, and that would be a lower federal supplement during a period of time, I think between now and the end of the year, and then a return to work bonus.
Now that I like. Senator Rob Portman said we need to be creative. Absolutely, we need to be more creative because this is a complex problem. This is a major problem, and it requires, for, in his words, creative thinking.
We need to come up with something creative.
So I agree with that 100%. He also said the booster after the 31st of July should be reduced going forward through the end of the year, and he also talked about a back to work bonus. So what he's talking about is individuals who remain unemployed after the 31st of July continue to get a booster, but not $600 a week. according to him. And he also talks about individuals who get back to work. He talks about them getting a $450 a week bonus to get back to work, which they would earn for up to 6 weeks, on top of their normal salary.
And that'll help get people back to work, which everybody
Senator,
should be for.
Senator, what do we do with those folks who really can't go back to work, either because of their age or because they have comorbidities or other issues that make it unsafe for them to go back to work?
Well, this is a voluntary program, Andrew. So anybody who wants to stay on UI at whatever the level is, they certainly can. Most states, as you know, have somewhere between 35 and 60% wage replacement in their unemployment insurance program. And that's the ultimate safety net. That continues no matter what. And the question is, what kind of federal supplement should there be beyond that?
Now, if you paid close attention to what he said that the back to work bonus is a voluntary program. Now, the implication that he gave was that individuals can choose to remain on unemployment insurance, what he calls as UI, and then they would get between 30 to 60% of their wage, which, by the way, is how the unemployment system is structured during normal times. What he said here is that the point of argument, the point of contention between the Democrats and the Republicans is the extent of the booster after the 31st of July. Now, there are a lot of gray areas in this. If you're called back to work, do you lose your unemployment benefits? I've done other training videos on this. If your employer reports you to the state agency for not returning to work, what are the implications for you? Can you even opt to not go back to work because you feel unsafe and stay on UI unemployment insurance? All these are the gray areas that I've tackled in other videos on my channel, so you definitely want to check out the unemployment benefits crash course. But what Senator Rob Portman said here is that the program is voluntary, which basically, what he's basically trying to say is that if you want to go back to work, you can, and then you'll get the bonus. And if you don't want to go back to work, you can stay on unemployment insurance, if you listen to his words carefully.
And then the program, the return to work bonus, is of course a voluntary program. I think a lot of people would take us up on it because people want to go back to work, but that disincentive is huge. And it's also hard for employers to ask people to come back to work when you have that kind of a gap, because as you know, under the UI system, you're supposed to be searching for work, and supposedly if you have an employer asking you to come back, you're supposed to leave UI and go back to work. Right now, the UI systems are kind of overwhelmed. It's hard for them to administer that.
So this also was pretty significant, because on the one hand, you have the employee or the worker. On the other hand, you have the employer or the business, and sort of in the middle, you have the state, which is completely overwhelmed. Now, the employer, if they want the employee to come back to work, they can ask the employee to come back to work. But what if the employee does not want to go back to work? So this is a complex problem, and there are other variables such as what if you lose your job? What if you've been furloughed? What if you're called back to work but with a limited number of hours? What if you have to take a pay cut to go back to work? So there are a lot of gray areas here. And unfortunately, in this interview, I see Senator Portman focused on the disincentive to work and focused on back to work. Disincentive to work and back to work. It's not as simple as that. There are human beings here who need to be able to pay rent, pay their mortgage, keep the lights on, put food on the table, take care of their kids, take care of others in their family.
It's also hard for employers to ask for that when you've got this kind of disparity.
Senator, it seems like your plan is a pretty common sense, down the middle sort of plan. Is it really breaking down on party lines as to who will sign up for this and who won't?
I don't think so. I mean, I've talked to a number of Democrats about it. 4 or 5 of them were interested in working with me at one point, and then I think they were told by their leadership, our plan is 600. That's our negotiating position going into this. Let's stick with that.
So this goes back to, again, the clash in ideologies between the Democrats and the Republicans. The Democrats want to make sure that the $600 a week federal booster essentially continues after the 31st of July, presumably because they can use this as a talking point in the upcoming November election. So this is where things get a little political. But again, I believe that the senator should have been grilled with much more difficult, much more challenging questions, because it is in that gray area, it is in that zone that all the difficulty, all the challenges lie. This is not a simple situation like, hey, there's a disincentive to go back to work, or you need to be getting a back to work bonus. There are a lot of issues, there are a lot of life issues, there are a lot of economic issues, and there are a lot of personal issues that exist in the middle that were really not addressed in this interview.
If you talk to them, as I'm sure you have, they will tell you they're hearing the same thing I'm hearing. I mean, if you have to make, in a state like Ohio, $54,000 a year in order to make it worth leaving unemployment, it's a disincentive. There's no question about it. And for small businesses, this is a real problem. So they're hearing that too. Most Democrats realize that. The question is, how can we work out something to deal with this July 31st deadline? And I think the return to work bonus is a good way to do that.
So now here are my thoughts on this whole situation. The only light I see at the end of the tunnel is that there is some consensus between the Democrats and the Republicans that there needs to be some sort of ongoing unemployment benefit by way of a booster beyond the 31st of July. For many of us, for many of my subscribers watching this video, and for millions of individuals, this $600 a week federal booster is a lifeline for individuals. So this should continue in some form or another. Based on what I've heard in the interview, there seems to be some form of a continuation that is likely to happen. Is it going to be 400? Is it going to be 600? We don't know. Is there also going to be a back to work bonus? That's something that the administration is trying to do. Exactly what's going to pan out, we'll find out. I'll definitely make sure I report that back to you, to all my subscribers in my video. If you learned something new from this video, please click the subscribe button. Please enable notifications so you get an instant update. And you can do me a favor and please click the like button. That does help out the YouTube algorithm. That's your way of rewarding me for all of the work, for all of the effort that goes into creating these videos, editing these videos, and publishing them on YouTube. There's a lot of time that goes into this. I really appreciate you watching. Once again, thank you so much. Please click the like button. Please click subscribe. Please enable notifications so you get instant updates from me. I release videos at 2 p.m. East Coast time most days of the week, and I look forward to engaging with you, my community. We've been growing very rapidly, and so I'm very excited to go on this journey with you and to continue bringing you information that hopefully helps you and moves you forward. Thank you so much.